Welcome. This is the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, Texas. My name is Luther Elmore. We hold these forums most Sundays, except for major holidays and in the dead of summertime. They're free and open to the public, and we invite you to join us here in North Central Austin at 4700 Grover Avenue. We hold these forums. We've been holding them since 1954, when this church was first incorporated, and we do them to fulfill the mission of the church, to nourish souls, transform lives, and do justice. We invite you to join us. If you want additional information about the forums, you can go to our church website, austinuu.org. Today our presentation will be from the group ECCO, Ending Community Homeless Coalition. ECCO is an agency that works to end homelessness in Austin. It has community programs, and part of what it does is try to reach out and help establish affordable housing. ECCO has an annual budget of over $1 million. It receives grants from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and also from the Austin Chamber of Commerce to try to address this continuing social issue in Austin. Our specific presenter today is Ms. Bree Williams. Ms. Williams holds a Master in Social Work from Texas State University, and she is the Director of Community Housing with ECCO. She began her work with ECCO in 2014, and she's dedicated to serving her Austin neighbors who do experience homelessness, trying to work with opportunities with the Austin Travis County Integral Care, Downtown Community Court, Front Steps, and Foundation communities. We welcome her today. If you would help me in greeting her. Bree.
Thank you, and good afternoon, or good morning. It's Sunday, so we can kind of let those bleed into each other. My name is Bree Williams, and I am with ECCO, the Ending Community Homelessness Coalition. I just want to start by thanking you for inviting us on behalf of the entire ECCO team. We are passionate about what we do. We do believe we can end homelessness in Austin and Travis County, but we are humbled and aware that we can't do it alone, and we need an entire community rallying around to support that. So today I'm going to spend some time, 35 to 40 minutes to be exact, and I'm going to try to keep it on track there. Hopefully painting the picture. I really want to inform what we know to be true in Austin, Travis County around folks, individuals, and families experiencing homelessness. So we'll first start with just that. Who is experiencing homelessness in Austin? What does that look like? What does the data tell us there? Then we can move into our specific community assets and gaps. So what programs, supports, and services do we already have in place? And that being known, what gaps do we still have that need to be addressed? And then the vision and strategies, which is the really fun part. We've figured out a lot locally in Austin as well as around the country of what it takes for communities to end homelessness. We have a vision for how to implement that here as well as other cities in the country, and some strategies to help us get there. And then finally, sharing some new opportunities that we're just very blessed and excited that Austin will be embarking with 9 other communities in the country around ending youth homelessness specifically. So I want to give y'all some details there because it's pretty fantastic. So to paint a little bit of an overview quickly of who ECCO is. So ECCO really is a coalition. We are staffed, we're our own 501c3, but we are a coalition representing all of the providers across the community in Austin ending homelessness. So that includes our emergency night shelters. Many of you are probably familiar with Front Steps, the agency that runs the Arch, as well as the Salvation Army, who provides a lot of our shelter to women and children, as well as our supportive service providers, right? Caritas of Austin, the Housing Authority of the City of Austin, the Veterans Administration, Foundation for the Homeless, LifeWorks, the list goes on and on. And so ECCO's primary role is to not only support those providers, but help to move their work forward so that we can present as a unified force around those vision and strategies. So one of our biggest assignments every year is to send what we call a collaborative application to HUD, and that is where our largest funding source for the continuum lies. A little over $6 million at this point annually, and so ECCO hosts that There's, I believe, 9 collaborative applicants at this point, and we help that process go up to the federal level. But additionally, we try to address gaps in the community. My role, as I said earlier, is really focused on housing, so trying to create those unique housing opportunities for the folks we're serving. We run a very large, to me it's very overwhelming, database system in the community called HMIS, which stands for the Homeless Management Information System. And so it's a huge database that over 20 agencies use, where we enter data into to try to follow the trends and needs of the folks we're serving. So all that's to say that ECCO does a lot, but we're nothing without the supporters on the front line that are working day in and day out to end homelessness for individuals and families. Okay, so we're gonna start with who is experiencing homelessness. A couple of notes before we go into this. I will own the fact that this is very data rich and heavy in some ways, but that really is where homeless services is going. So we're really trying to mobilize what we have learned to help paint that picture for what we need moving forward to do our work. That database I just referenced, HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System, is where almost all of this data generates from, and I'll kind of explain a little bit more about that as we move along to be sure that I'm not losing y'all with the data intensity. Okay, so this is where we start. What does the population of folks experiencing literal homelessness look like in Austin, Travis County? I have a feeling that some of y'all have probably heard of the point in time count before, or the PIT count, maybe even volunteered before, maybe even planning to volunteer this year with us. So what the point in time count is an annual opportunity to assemble as many volunteers as we can. It's usually about 500 or so, that we coordinate to literally span out across the city and county to count everyone on a given night or morning. It gets a little gray there, but one point in time, how many people are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so what that really means is how many people are literally sleeping on the street, how many people are sleeping in cars, or anywhere that people aren't intended to sleep, right? So maybe an abandoned building, maybe a storage unit, something like that. At that same time, we also count how many folks are sleeping in the emergency night shelters. And so between those two numbers, we're able to get a picture of a point in time. We know, as every other city in the country, that it's a bit imperfect. Finding every single individual experiencing unsheltered homelessness across Travis County, so thinking about those areas that are not developed yet, that are still heavily wooded, is no small feat, but it is an opportunity to help us get as much data as possible. So, to walk through some data here with you, over the years, since at least 2010, and actually prior to 2010, we've been performing the point in time count. And again, like I said, we count the number of unsheltered folks as well as sheltered folks. And we've seen some trends that really line up with trends across the country. As you can imagine, a lot of this is driven by also trends in our economy, trends and other things happening in our world. So you can see in 2016, we saw a spike. We counted a total of 2,138 folks experiencing homelessness, again, that literal homelessness. We were shocked, but we weren't shocked. More than anything, we felt even more passion and drive to continue our work. And then luckily in 2017, despite the fact that every year we keep putting more volunteers on the ground, really trying to do our best to get the most comprehensive count we can, we did see a slight decrease in 2017, which we found to be very promising. And if we're doing our job right, that'll keep going down year to year. So essentially, there's some other data metrics that we look at to kind of get a sense of the total number of folks experiencing homelessness in our community. One of those metrics is when folks present at any of the agencies providing services and ask for help, right? So that could mean walking inside the arch and just wanting to do a load of laundry. However, that gives us a clue that that person is probably experiencing homelessness. So that's another way that we measure how many folks are in need of services throughout a given year. So in 2016, that was a little over 7,000 individual people. So again, remembering this is people, that could be families that have 5, 6, 7 members, or it could be individuals, but it's quite a few that are moving through the system at any given year. Okay, so this actually, we're gonna talk a little bit about what we know of folks experiencing homelessness in terms of what individual challenges or barriers they may be having. This data right here is actually comes through our coordinated entry system, which is a much more holistic look at an individual or family's experience in homelessness. There's a lot of information gathered around what particular barriers or challenges they have in front of them. So it gives us a much richer understanding of what might be happening. So as you can see, 67% of folks experiencing homelessness are unemployed or do not have any earned income. So that's obviously staggering and probably kind of validates what we would assume to be true, that it would be difficult to fall into homelessness if you weren't already facing poverty, right? If you had wealth or had your own assets, maybe you could experience some of these other crises around mental health or physical disability, but you've got a financial safety net there that won't let you fall into literal homelessness. So that kind of speaks to what we would assume to be true. 61% report going to the hospital or do not go for care at all when they are not feeling well. So essentially what that's speaking to is that lack of access to preventative or primary care, that the only healthcare system people feel they have access to is the emergency room, or none at all. And 56% report experiencing an emotional, physical, psychological, or other type of abuse or trauma in their life. So there is a very staggering representation of trauma that folks have experienced maybe in their childhood, maybe when they were adults, that they're also confronting as they also experience this housing crisis. And there's a few other datas on there. One that's really, to me, staggering is 29% report having experienced domestic violence in their lifetime. So not only do many report experiencing some type of trauma, but then also a pretty staggering overrepresentation of domestic violence survivors there. And also one that I find even more horrifying, honestly, is 62% report having no planned activity that bring them happiness or fulfillment in a given day. So if you can just really kind of empathize with what it might be like to all you have in front of you is meeting your basic needs. Where are you going to sleep tonight? Where's your next meal going to come from? If you're a parent, you're also obviously concerned about that with your children. So there's honestly no time or energy left to think about something that might bring you fulfillment. Could be something as simple as calling a loved one. Okay, so we're going to break down a little bit where folks are sleeping or resting who are experiencing little homelessness. As I said earlier, we kind of break this into two large categories of folks accessing our emergency night shelter system, and then folks who either choose not to or there's no capacity available to them, but they're sleeping somehow outside or unsheltered. So 28% are sleeping in our emergency night shelter system. And then there's a variety of places that we consider to be not meant for human habitation, meaning that no one intended for folks to be sleeping in these places. So 28% report sleeping on the street, a sidewalk, or a doorway. So actually what you would picture with unsheltered, literally no shelter from the elements. And of course, this time of year, as with the winter, that becomes even more concerning. I know that some of my colleagues in Arizona right now are really struggling with the folks they're serving are actually suffering burns from being exposed to the cement because it's so hot right now. So it just creates a whole nother set of challenges to just make sure that that basic safety is met, that someone's going to survive the night, so to speak. 16% report sleeping in a car or a van. And then 16%, the data here also covers beaches. We know that's not true for Austin Travis County, but what is true is like riverbeds, things like that, or parks. There's definitely a lot of that happening. And then 10% are other, and that would be folks that are sleeping also under the underpasses of I-35. So a little bit more of our kind of more visible folks that you might kind of bring to mind because they're on dangerous high-speed roadways. So this is going to talk a little bit about the length of time folks experience homelessness. As homeless services really becomes a bit more professional and more data-driven, this is a way that we really look at our community and how we're doing. Our overall goal is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. We realize, just as you might imagine, there are a lot of factors at play that create a society where folks fall into homelessness. Many, many factors. So what we see is more pressing and right in front of us is that we need to have a system in place so that if and when that does happen, we can act immediately, we can be client-centered in the services we provide, and make sure someone has access to permanent housing immediately. So that's where we get that rare, brief, and non-recurring. So in that, the total length of time that folks are reporting living on the streets or in shelters, 61% report 2 or more years, and that's the total length. So that might be multiple episodes of homelessness, but that's just not acceptable. And then, of course, 39% reporting less than 2 years. Also, we have about 40% of the individuals that we're serving meet the definition for chronic homelessness. I won't make your head spin too much with how you actually meet that definition, but essentially what that definition captures is folks living with a permanent disability, and that could be a physical disability, mental health related disability, and have also experienced homelessness more or less for 2 years or more. So it's really kind of trying to dive in and narrow down to those among us who probably are the most vulnerable pending their disability status and their length of time homelessness. So 40% is pretty high. So some of my colleagues are data masters. It's not me. They are phenomenal with the things they can come up with, and this, what I'm showing right now, is a new way that we are starting to divide out our data by council district. So as I said earlier, we did that annual point in time count where we literally go out and count folks that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and we also gather data on where we're at when we interact with them. So now we're actually able to break that down by council districts. How people are able to do this is beyond me, but I'm so glad that we have this level of data to advocate and talk to our local leaders about. We know that the vast majority of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness are in the downtown area. That assumption proves to be true with our data. However, we also know that it's true in all council districts. This is a community challenge. This is a citywide problem, so we're really trying to paint that picture. So speaking of downtown, which is one of the biggest challenges ahead of ECCO and our partner agencies right now, is kind of what is happening in our little downtown hub of services. What I'm showing right now is a map that's just really kind of demonstrating what we probably assume to be true, that the vast majority of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness are in that downtown area, very close to the services we provide, being the Salvation Army, Front Steps, who runs the Arch, and Caritas of Austin, as well as Trinity Center. We've got a lot of services right there in one compact area. So not only do we have quite a few folks sleeping inside the shelter on that night, because what I'm showing right now is 178 folks identified unsheltered in that area. That's not even talking about the folks that were inside the Arch or inside Salvation Army. So that's just a really dense concentration of folks that is also right next to our entertainment district. So I think we all know the struggles therein. So a little bit also, as I said earlier, so many systems at play when we talk about why do people become homeless, which I think is always kind of a million-dollar question that, as you can imagine, there really is no easy answer to. One way that I've taken to describing it to folks in terms of what I've learned over my years doing this work is there's no one single thing that is sort of the catalyst into someone becoming homelessness. It's usually a culmination of multiple factors. The only single thing that is almost always true is poverty. So the way I kind of describe it is someone experiencing poverty plus another crisis in their life. Could it be the onset of a major disability? It could be a divorce. It could be that they're a survivor of domestic violence. But some other crisis coupled with living in poverty is where you start to kind of paint the picture of how people become homeless. That by no means means that anyone experiencing poverty who also experiences one of these crises becomes homeless. In fact, it's pretty rare that they do become homeless. However, it kind of helps us paint that picture and also paints how complex it can be to address someone's crisis and help them stabilize in their housing. So we divide it into a few different areas. Obviously the economic factors, which would just be the unstable economy, the low paying wages, the lack of a living wage. as well as family and support network. I know I'm blessed that should something happen to me, I do have a fantastic support network and family that basically wouldn't allow me to become homeless, right? They would do whatever they had to do. If that meant me sleeping on the kitchen floor, that's where I would be. But there are a lot of folks among us who don't have that. Additionally, the community or environment, there's very high barriers to a very limited stock of affordable housing. The displacement from housing due to natural disasters. In Austin, we see, quite an influx during different hurricanes hitting the Gulf Coast of folks who are being displaced and who also may not have a lot of natural support or resource. And additionally, obviously, the criminal justice system plays a big role in the community of folks experiencing homelessness, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But more than anything, that's where we see that oppressive system with the systemic racial discrimination flowing into the population of people experiencing homelessness. And this is where I get really excited because I'm so excited that ECCO has this level of data to share with people. So as I said, we've seen spikes in our homeless population over the past 2 or 3 years. However, we all know that we're also seeing massive spikes in the Austin-Travis County population. So now we can actually look at those two numbers and how they're moving together dynamically. It stands to reason that if folks find Austin to be a desirable place to be and are moving here every day, so our folks experiencing homelessness might think it was a desirable place to be. So what we're looking at right now is, in real numbers, as our homeless population grows, we need to look at that as compared to how our overall population is growing and see if our percentage of folks experiencing homelessness is rising, is it stabilizing, or is it decreasing? So when you look at it in this more dynamic way, we're actually seeing a decrease in the number of people experiencing homelessness, which is great news. Doesn't mean I don't have a job to do, but it's great news that we're actually able to kind of look at that data in a more dynamic way and paint our picture. So we've, like I said, we've gotten a little bit smarter and more advanced in our work. And what we know to be true that we think is maybe a more successful argument for a more diverse audience is that allowing folks to remain in homelessness is expensive. Not only is it inhumane, and that's not the type of society we want to be a part of, and we're filled with empathy for what's happening, but to help that argument expand to more audience members, we're also to talk about how expensive that is on our system. When folks are experiencing homelessness, they're essentially in a cycle of crisis, right? So as I said earlier, they're accessing the ER for any health care at all. We all know how expensive that is as opposed to preventative care access. They're more likely to become incarcerated, albeit for small petty crimes like criminal trespass or no sit, no lie, but they're still going to spend a night in jail. That's not cheap for the system either. Additionally, our EMS system, if folks are using the emergency room for their medical care and you don't have a car and it's the middle of the night and the buses aren't running, EMS might be the only way you could get there. We know that's not cheap. And also our emergency night shelters, believe it or not, it's not a cheap way to do business. Those are 24-hour staffed facilities. Lights are on 24 hours. Quite a bit goes into it. So actually, my fearless leader, Ann Howard, she's in DC right now talking about a new model that we're proposing, Pay for Success, essentially, is what it's called. And it's looking at all this data on how much money and resource we're throwing into an unacceptable situation, and allowing folks to remain homeless. And so how about we divert those funds to providing supportive services and housing opportunities? And guess what? We're also going to save money. It's a win-win. So right now, that's another one of the strategies that we're working towards that we find makes sense to a lot of folks. We also do have a little bit more data about the healthcare access. In our work in Austin, I know for myself, I can speak personally that one of my biggest fears of the folks I'm serving is a lot of the disabilities that they're living with are experiencing homelessness and living with those types of disabilities. We fear for their safety and their continued life. And so we're trying to really get a better understanding of while we build out this system that is always towards permanent housing, how can we be sure that folks get that critical access to health care in the meantime? And so as a community, we're really trying to dive into that data more and do a better job to get folks health care. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we also have pretty robust data on racial and ethnic representation of folks experiencing homelessness in Austin. I should say this is all self-report. In fact, almost everything I'm talking to you right now is self-report. We don't assume that we know anyone else's story. We just sort of humbly ask for them to share it with us. And that goes for this as well. So what we now have is, obviously we have the Travis County data around what the racial and ethnic makeup looks like of our community. And then we also have that as compared to folks experiencing homelessness. So one of the most staggering figures here is that I think it hovers between 8 and 9% in Travis County. 8 or 9% of folks identify as Black or African American in our community as a whole, comprehensive data there. However, 42% of people experiencing homelessness identify as Black or African American. And every time I say that, my voice shakes, because that is some of the most profound data I think I have seen around what we're looking at when we're looking at homelessness really is a failure or a challenge of so many other systems, and it's just not acceptable from a social justice lens. We also have that broken down in terms of folks who identify Hispanic or Latino. We also see an overrepresentation there, just not quite as staggering. I think the general community, we see a 34% representation, and within the homeless community, 42%. So we're still seeing a disparity, we're still seeing an overrepresentation, just not quite as staggering as folks identifying as Black or African American. So I'm going to move on real quick. I hope y'all are staying with me with all this data, but it really is painting a better picture of what we're experiencing, to what we kind of refer to as our assets and gaps. So as a community, when we take a comprehensive look, what do we have that's addressing homelessness right now? How is that performing? And then so what gaps does that leave us, assuming that we have a good idea of who's actually experiencing homelessness, who's being served right now, and then sort of what's left, what do we have next? So we have an inventory of our community shelter beds. Of course, most of you are familiar with the Arch, which is our only it's our only men's shelter. We do have small programs out in the community, but they're not serving nearly the volume the Arch is. And then, of course, right next door to the Arch is one of the Salvation Army's campuses who does serve some men, also single women, as well as women and children. And then Salvation Army has another campus out near Tannehill that is much smaller, and I believe only focused on women with children, maybe some single women as well. And then we also have, of course, Safe Place, who's our primary domestic violence survivor shelter, and they do a ton of other stuff, transitional housing, permanent housing, fantastic work. A new entry, which is a small facility that's vast majority is targeted towards veterans experiencing homelessness, although they do serve some other folks as well. Foundation for the Homeless, which you may be aware of, it's a much smaller agency that relies a lot on the faith-based community to help support their shelters. So what's really fantastic about Foundation for the Homeless is they have devised a system where families can stay together, meaning if there's two partners and children in the household, that whole family can stay together versus having to separate out. And so getting down to just, what the current needs are, this is where my rubber hits the road of like literally how many permanent housing opportunities do we need to have for folks experiencing homelessness. So the vast majority of folks that we're serving are single individuals, and on top of that, they're single men. So essentially, we have 2,714 individuals waiting on a single unit right now, be it an efficiency or a one-bedroom. Additionally, of course, we have larger households. They just don't make up as large of a proportion. But we have 160 folks that are waiting for either 3 or 4 bedroom units. So that, if you think about a 3-bedroom unit, you're really talking about a household of probably 5, 4-bedroom unit, a household of probably 7. So that's also obviously a desperate need. We're talking about families with children there. And then the type of service needed according to vulnerability levels. So we also divide the services we provide into 2 primary buckets, so to speak. Permanent supportive housing, which is the one that folks tend to have a little bit more familiarity with, is an intervention that has been around in the homeless service community for a few years now. It's definitely proven itself up. It's very effective at ending homelessness for highly vulnerable individuals and for helping them not to return to homelessness. So it is an intensive intervention where somebody is going to get paired with a case manager who might meet with them 2-3 times a week, depending on their need, with a subsidy, so that they're only paying 30% of their income in rent, and then with, of course, a housing unit to accommodate that. And those folks can stay in that program for as long as they need to. For some folks, that's 3 years, and for some, it's indefinitely. And since it is such an intensive intervention, we try to prioritize it for those that are most vulnerable at any given point in time. And then additionally, we have rapid rehousing, which is an intervention geared towards really towards families and folks that maybe haven't been experiencing homelessness for that long. Maybe they've only been homeless for a couple months, they have a recent work history, but they really just need a little push back up into permanent housing, some support, some limited financial assistance, and we think they're going to stabilize. And we found that to be very successful as well. Okay, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking to y'all about the vision. So essentially at ECCO, this is really where we're tested. So we are responsible for bringing all these coalition providers together and making sure that we're all working towards a coordinated community plan to end homelessness. We know that we're stronger when we're together, that we all have our own area of expertise, and that together we can come up with a coordinated plan. And so essentially what that's all driving down to is making sure every single individual experiencing homelessness has the access to the same opportunities at recovery and support that anyone else. So we see that as involving, obviously, housing first, always foremost. Homelessness is a housing crisis, so we need a permanent housing opportunity. To healthy food, to high-performing schools, to community opportunities, obviously to healthcare, to jobs, transportation, the whole 9 yards. I mean, we know that that is where folks thrive the best. That's how I thrive, and folks experiencing homelessness are no different. Okay, so as we've had a lot of success in our community, and it's taught us of kind of how to look at this from breaking down these large numbers I've been sharing of 2,000 and 1,000 that can feel a little overwhelming to, okay, how do we transform a system to meet that need? And so we've been drawn to this idea of an overflowing bathtub, right? So that's what we have in front of us right now. We have a bathtub that's full, and the water is continuing to run, and it's spilling out, right? It feels like it's overflowing of the inflow of folks falling into homelessness, right, that are losing their jobs or getting evicted, having to flee domestic violence. They're continuing to come into the system for support. However, our outflow, or how fast we're draining out and moving folks into permanent housing, is not keeping up. So we've got this overflowing bathtub right now. So where we see our work here is sort of twofold. One is we've got to speed up this exit. We've got to make sure that we can house more folks with the type of support they need in the places they want to live as quickly as we can, and at the same time kind of be looking up at that faucet and saying, hey, what's going on? Why do we still see all these folks falling into homelessness? What can we do to inform that as well? And ideally, the bathtub will stop overflowing. That's what we're working towards anyways. So I'm not going to go too heavy into how our system is functioning right now, because if y'all thought I'd been data intense, it would get even more intense. But right now, the way we're addressing homelessness is through what we call coordinated entry. Some folks may have heard of coordinated assessment. It's the same thing. So coordinated entry is a concept that came down from the federal level that basically kind of wagged its finger at every city and said, you're making this too hard. People fall into homelessness in your community and they don't know where to go. They don't know what they're eligible for. They're already experiencing a crisis. There has to be a better way. So they charged each community with developing a new system, referred to as coordinated entry or coordinated assessment, where folks could present, say, hey, I'm having a housing crisis. I need help. Where should I go next? And the onus not be on them to travel across the city on buses to different agencies. So we've We're a little over 2 years into our coordinated entry implementation in Austin. We've seen it be fantastic and successful. And so what that looks like is an individual will present. We have a few different ways coordinated entry can be accessed. We have a phone line. We have staff in person at the Arch and at the Salvation Army. And then we have other staff embedded in our outreach teams in the community. And they'll sit down with a family or an individual and ask quite a few questions, to be honest, to get a really good picture of what that individual is experiencing, what their challenges, barriers are, what their strengths are, and they'll make a recommendation for what type of housing service they need. And then that is what we then use to inform how the housing resources are scarce. I probably should have said this to start off with. I know that you know this. We do not have anywhere near the amount of resource that we need to serve this many folks. So that being what it is, we need to be very strategic about where we offer those resources. So what we're looking for is those that are experiencing the highest vulnerability at that moment in time. And that's how we're then, dedicating that permanent supportive housing and that rapid rehousing. But again, there's not nearly enough to serve everyone who needs it right now. So the vision we have for our system in Austin is we know scaling up one piece of this puzzle won't do any good unless we scale up all the pieces, right? It all has to work as a system together. Obviously, permanent housing is always the primary because it's also the most challenging to get, but also housing-focused shelters. Are our shelters a place where people feel safe and ready to access? And is it a pathway to permanent housing at all times? Additionally, housing-focused outreach. When we're outreaching to the folks experiencing literal homelessness, is that to meet a basic need, or is it to meet a basic need and start them on that pathway to housing? So everything kind of redirecting towards housing at all times. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do around addressing disparities in our system. Are we performing equitably? How do we see this vast disproportionality coming into the system? What is our role there? We have a lot of work to do. And then it being an effective system. We need to rely on outcomes. If programs aren't working effectively, we need to reallocate. Homelessness is too much of a crisis. It's too terrifying to allow programs to continue that aren't meeting the need, that aren't ending homelessness for folks. So, no reason to ignore the elephant in the room. We know that the downtown homelessness issue is definitely reached a crisis point. That's not lost on us at ECCO or any of our partner agencies. I can tell you that as a collaborative, the community is really coming together comprehensively to identify how to address this. We realize there are safety concerns for obviously the folks experiencing homelessness downtown, but also for other neighbors in the community who may not be experiencing homelessness. But we've got a lot of work to do. And obviously there's the problem of the concentration. I'm sure most of you have heard of the K2 epidemic. That's not making anything more easier for us, but K2 is a very cheap drug that is very accessible, not just downtown, but all over the community. So it's really done some damage to the vulnerable folks that are living downtown right now. And we're working heavily with APD on that. There's a lot of community commitment to find a very person-centered, trauma-informed approach to how to address that. Additionally, the downtown hotels and businesses are under sort of the same pressure that we are, right? They're struggling with trying to obviously increase their bottom line while kind of dealing with literal homelessness in the city right on their front doorstep. And I can tell you that they've been very collaborative with us, trying to identify the best solution, but they're really under the same pressure that we are. Also, right now, homelessness is criminalized in a lot of forms in Austin, and we're not alone. A lot of cities have this struggle where I think law enforcement really doesn't feel a better option at any point in time. And so we're working to try to develop new strategies there that enhance that public safety aspect, including those experiencing homelessness, but doesn't criminalize homelessness. And we see a lot of commitment from APD in that. So the one one way that Austin's a snowflake in some ways, like other cities like San Francisco and DC and New York and Denver, or just cities that people want to be in general, housing is challenging here. I could talk about this for days because this is what I do, but creating permanent housing opportunities for folks exiting homelessness can be really challenging. As our market tightens, as it becomes more attractive, that makes it harder and harder if you're not a stellar applicant for a rental opportunity, right? And that makes sense from a business model. Why would they rent to someone that I'm serving over someone that makes 5 times the rent and monthly income and has never, seen the inside of a police car? So it's a lot of education that we've been doing with our partners in housing as to how the folks we're serving accrue to these barriers. There's a richer story to be told there, and we've seen a lot of progress, honestly, but it still remains very challenging for us and for other communities in the country that are facing the same issues we are with our rental market. Okay, real quick, there's happy stories too that I want to share with y'all. We saw a lot of success locally with ending veteran homelessness, and that I can say was a burst of positive energy into the system of knowing what is possible when the entire continuum, as well as community members, as well as leaders in the business and rental industries come together and focus on one thing. It's amazing what can be achieved. So essentially, what we have in front of us right now are just the breakdown of the successes that we saw as we work towards ending veteran homelessness. It didn't happen overnight. It took quite a while, to be honest, and a lot of hard work. But what we were doing was trying to move our needle of veterans experiencing homelessness, again, always rooted in the data. So we knew how many veterans were on the street. We knew what all of their names were. We knew what their discharge status was. We knew what level of service they might need. And then the onus was on us to surge our ability to place folks into housing, so that the next veteran that falls into homelessness, we're ready. There's no wait list. We're ready to enroll you. We're ready to identify a permanent housing opportunity. And that summary is really glossing over how much work that took. So, Mayor Leffingwell originally signed on to the Mayor's Challenge to End Veteran Homelessness, which was an initiative that First Lady Obama started during our administration, current administration. We're all working with that, right? And then Mayor Adler signed on as well when he came into office, and it was just amazing what happened. So we know that it works. We know that it can work if we're all focused. We still have that system in place. We're still housing veterans every day because, of course, unfortunately, people are still falling into homelessness every day, including veterans. But we're here and we're ready, and there's no ridiculous wait for services. So that PIT count data that we initially talked about, at one point in time, Austin was like most cities in the country, and about 12% of people experiencing homelessness were veterans, which is obviously disproportionate in and of itself. 12% of the overall population is not veterans, and we're down to under 3%, which is fantastic. So we really have figured out how to sustain that system moving forward. And so launching off of that success, we moved into some opportunities with youth experiencing homelessness. And for this purpose, I'm talking about 18 to 24-year-olds experiencing literal homelessness who don't have an adult in the household. Some of them are parenting youth. Some of them are not. They're on their own, single individuals. But there's been a lot of federal resource lately to start kind of doing the same work we did with veterans, but now digging into this really complex issue of youth homelessness, and can we start to see the same results there? So we started off with a 100-day challenge to house as many youth as we could. That was kind of an opportunity for Austin to learn a little bit more. We need to get educated what the needs are. We know it looks different. How can we be informed here? And we were vastly successful, which was fantastic, which then sort of allowed us into a competition around the country to do what HUD calls a demonstration project. So it's a really fantastic opportunity because it's basically HUD saying, hey, Austin, we think that y'all are innovative, y'all are creative, that you're the right kind of environment to try out new things, for us to kind of humbly say, we don't know what works best for young people, so let's try and figure it out. So we were awarded a $5.2 million opportunity. Us and 9 other communities. We're underway in the planning process right now. We're very excited about it. We've got CPS at the table, AISD, all the partners together to figure out how we can really hone in on youth homelessness. So again, we're talking about young people that are under the age of 24 and that are not accompanied by a parent or guardian. Many of them are parenting themselves and have children themselves. We also know that when we're looking at vulnerability here, it can be very distinct with young people. We have a lot of young people who are aging out of foster or who were involved in the foster care system in their teen years, and that we see obviously a very heavy representation. Also of youth who identify as LGBTQ, there's a pretty heavy representation. We're still getting a better handle on our local data there, but nationally it's about 20%, which is very staggering. 20% of youth experiencing homelessness between 18 and 24 identify as LGBTQ. We also see, again, pregnant and parenting youth. We do see some victims or survivors of human trafficking in that age range, which is also very pressing, and a lot of youth who are doubled up, who are unstably housed, and we know that, considering their developmental age, really need to have stability at home. So again, we're excited, we're shouting it from the rooftops that we were awarded this opportunity to take our success with veterans and see if we can implement some of that with young people experiencing homelessness. We see that when we target subpopulations of individuals, we know it's not enough, we know we're not getting the job done, but the amount of passion and optimism that it drives into people is well worth it, because then we have new folks coming to the table wanting to work with us on ending homelessness. So like I said, right now we're in the planning process. We hope to kind of get boots on the ground tomorrow if it were up to us, but definitely this year to start doing the work of getting young folks into housing. We're very excited about it. And so, of course, the national objectives, HUD doesn't give you money without expecting anything in return, right? So they're really wanting us and the other communities who receive this to figure some things out that other cities can then use to drive their work. So it's also about building that national momentum. We saw that be really successful with veterans across the country as, it kind of became this healthy competition between cities, which is the best competition there is when it's about ending homelessness. And to evaluate, how HUD wants to know how as a community do you come together to coordinate services for this particular population that we know looks different, that we know has different needs, what is there to learn there? And then obviously it's all outcome driven. We want youth moving into stable housing of their choosing where they feel safe and secure. We want them to make permanent connections, to start establishing their own network of chosen family or chosen friends to support them moving forward. Education and employment opportunities, and social emotional well-being. We know that there's a developmental aspect to this work, and we need to be very cautious of that. And then the vision moving forward, building on that local momentum. We have lots of work to continue to do. But like I've said, we've established a pathway out. We know what works. The data is behind us on that. It's a resource issue more than anything. There's not enough money. There's not enough programming to get the job done right now. So we're continuing to tell the story of how it can work when you coordinate your services and your funding and how you can really move the ball forward. So I'm going to leave it up to some questions. I'm so tired of my own voice at this point. I'm sure y'all are too.
Thank you very much. We only have about 10 minutes left, and so please make your questions very, very succinct so that Ms. Williams can answer as many as possible. If you identify yourself as I come to you.
Marcus Barnes, enjoyed this. Would you happen to know what the homeless rate in Canada is compared to the U.S.?
I would not. That is a question I cannot answer. I can say that geographically there tends to be concentrations of folks where the weather is more temperate. So when you go to more extreme conditions, you tend to find less folks experiencing literal homelessness because they'll travel to places that are a bit more survivable.
Ed Underhill, I can see how from a crowd management perspective, having homelessness be criminalized is perhaps valuable, but symbolically, isn't it like horrendously unethical?
Yes, and I think that, yeah, it's that public safety and that stigma that we deal with of just our other neighbors who are not homeless, assuming that the virtue of being homeless makes you somehow different or more dangerous, and we all know that's not true, but it's really breaking through that wall of that stigma that there's not anything inherently dangerous about somebody experiencing homelessness.
Hi, Richard Halpin. Thank you so much for what you're doing and your team. One program I didn't hear you mention is a program called Community
First?
Community First
Yeah.
Village. And I understand they try to bring all these services you were talking about,
They do.
including long-term housing, in one place. Can you tell us more about that, and is it a model that works?
Absolutely. I think it's one of many models that work, but Community First Village, if you're not familiar, is a single site opportunity that Mobile Lives and Fishes developed. It's very revolutionary in terms of ways to end homelessness. And I believe right now they're projecting 250 housing opportunities, maybe 200, where, yeah, they have everything on site. They have access to healthcare, to jobs, to training, to, spiritual opportunities. It's a really beautiful model, and so we see it as one absolutely integral way to end homelessness. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Hi, Chris Schluterman. 2 comments. I'm a little skeptical. Not that I don't believe you, that I don't see enough to believe you. And another thing is, you mentioned pre-homelessness with the people are aging out of foster homes. Why don't you guys work with the county when you have eviction notices served on adults? Wouldn't it be less expensive to intercept them early than let them go and enter this expensive system you've described?
No, valid, very valid. I will say that one thing that we're grappling with locally, as many cities are, is trying to really hone in that data around how many folks are evicted, how many folks end up homeless because of that. That's a very difficult data point to get our arms around. But yes, absolutely. Creating a coordinated way to provide prevention services is what we would deem those as preventing folks from entering literal homelessness is very challenging.
Hi, Shirley Wyler. I told a woman friend of mine that she could use my couch. It's been over a year and she's still on my couch. She's sort of underemployed, professional woman, single, and I asked her last night, I said, well, how's it going? What do you see out there? And would there be, could she contact somebody in your program to see if she could get on some list somewhere? Because, this can't go on just indefinitely.
Sure, absolutely. So the coordinated entry system that I spoke of would not necessarily be appropriate for her because thanks to the amazing work you're doing, she's not unsheltered right now, just for her own safety. However, there are a ton of providers that really focus on folks like that. I don't know if she's tried to access affordable housing, but that could be a great opportunity for her. The Austin Tenants Council produces what we call the Blue Book, but it's basically this annual comprehensive guide to pretty much every affordable housing opportunity in Travis County. And so if you just Google Austin Tenants Council, they have a really nice PDF on their website you can use. But if it sounds like one of her most immediate needs is just some deeply affordable permanent housing, that would be a fantastic place to start.
Hi, Alan Campbell, Co-op Radio. A complaint I've encountered about homeless shelters in Austin is that virtually none serve lesbian and transgender homeless folks. Anything you could say about efforts to alleviate that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely staring us in the face right now. We know that folks experiencing homelessness, especially transgender folks experiencing homelessness, are extremely vulnerable. HUD has published some guidance, which is always helpful to have policy to back system change like that. It's referred to as the Equal Access Rule, and essentially it's just what you would think it is. It's saying that everyone in your community needs to have equal access to safe shelter that's appropriate for them. And what they've then said is, and here's what that looks like for folks on the LGBTQ spectrum who may not feel safe in a traditional shelter setting. So we're literally right now digging into that to be sure we have a system that ensures that safety, and especially also, as I mentioned, for the young people as well.
I'm Helen LaFleur. I was wondering if you have a significant percentage of your homeless who are older, say over 55?
Yep, your assumption is correct. I can't remember what the percentage is off the top of my head, but the majority are, and I'm not sure if 55 is where we break down that age, but yes, it is folks who are a little bit older, men, single men of over 55 is our heaviest concentration.
Since I am no longer a young man, I can recall.
Debatable, young at heart.
I can recall as a young person never seeing homeless people in America.
Right.
How did we get to this situation, and how do we get to the position where we accept it in our society?
That's a really big question that I might have to answer as Bree and not Bree, who works for ECCO. So I think that we all know that during the 80s, the massive deinstitutionalization of folks experiencing severe mental illness was a very effective start at homelessness. It wasn't all, but I think that is what I understand to be where we really got to the beginning of that visible homelessness. And then as we trudged on from there, of course, there really wasn't any effective mental health care to take place of institutions. Not that I'm advocating that we go back to institutionalizing folks, but we need some sort of effective care. And additionally, as the economy just kept pressing on both ends and folks were pushed further and further into poverty, I think all of it just ended up with a swirling problem of visible homelessness. How we became to accept it as a society, if y'all can figure that out, let me know, because that's the one that keeps me up at night. I don't know.
Would you please address quickly the role for volunteers, people like us who maybe don't have a sofa to offer, as Shirley did, but how can we help?
Absolutely. So for the ECCO answer to that, we do that point in time count every year. We need as much support as we can get. I'm glad to share it with folks in your leadership so that when it comes time to sign up, y'all have the opportunity. Additionally, all of our partner agencies have, of course, volunteer opportunities. Front Steps does, Caritas of Austin. At ECCO, we don't directly serve individuals experiencing homelessness, so we don't have the same types of opportunities. But there are lots with Salvation Army, Front Steps, Caritas of Austin, and then of course lack of resource is always the biggest issue in front of us. So providing financial support to any of those partner agencies is crucial.
And I think we have time for one final question.
Hi, Sam Duckworth. About a decade ago, I and some other folks from this community were putting up sheetrock and putting on shingles for a number of homes that were built over on the east side. I do not even remember the name of the program, but how is that going now, and is it still going on? Are we still building houses and then putting families in them?
Absolutely. We have a lot of partners. I'm thinking of CDCs, Community Development Corporations, who do just that and provide affordable housing opportunities in the core of the city, still doing amazing work. Habitat for Humanity is still doing amazing work. For us and our work in ending homelessness, we need that. We need actual homes being built, but we just can't wait. So we also just need to find our way into the current rental market. So we're trying to kind of balance all of those solutions at one time. Yes, sir. I think this gentleman was asking about volunteer opportunities in the core of the city to build homes for families and individuals who need it, and that is definitely something that is still happening. I mean, Habitat for Humanity is definitely my go-to there, but there's also smaller groups that are working on that.
Bree Williams and ECCO, thank you so very much for your presentation.
Thanks.
Thank you for your passion in addressing this issue, and thank you for your dedication.
Thank you.